mode. Let's do that. Okay, welcome everybody to the first discussion, meetup. What's the right word here? Event?
Book club.
Book club, yeah, of the UK edition of the Dev Book Club. Saying it might be worth just before we start, just doing a quick round of introductions, just so everybody's familiar. My name's Oliver. I'm a software engineer in Vika, and I run the PHP South Wales user group. Yeah, I've been watching some of these sessions from the US group for a little while, and then wanted to join, but they're midnight here. So there was a suggestion made to start a UK chapter. So we did, and this is what we're doing. So yeah. So Ismail, do you want to go next maybe?
Sure. I'm Ismael Velasco. I am also currently residing in Wales. I am a software engineer at Pipsync. I have a particular love for this generation of writers. Like they invented everything that we kind of use today. And I'm really looking forward to just seeing how everyone relates to it from really different perspectives, experiences, levels of experience, etc. So yeah, I'm very keen, and it's also very timely because I just inherited the job of maintaining project that I've been using for ages, but that had, super legacy code that needs complete refactoring. So it's wonderful to be reading this just as I'm actually in the forest of refactoring. So I'm greatly looking forward to going on this journey. And also, it's great to meet other people and to have sort of meaningful conversations like that. So I hope at the end of it, I get to know you all a bit better. So that's me. Susanna, you want to go next? You're on my screen.
Yeah, right. My name is Susanna. I am web developer and Laravel's founder. And yeah, I also read a lot, not just technical books, but like books in general. I'm a member of a few different book clubs. But yeah, it's really, because I notice it helps me when I read even other books. It's just it's nice to discuss about, have discussions with people about the books that I read. I remember them better, and I just process the information better. So when I saw the Dev Book Club, I was like, yay, how come I didn't know about it? But then I saw the times and I was like, well, now I'm not going to join that. Midnight that's a bit too late. So it's great that we are having this UK chapter, because yeah. Well, that's me. Who's next? Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm Jenny. It comes up as Jennifer because I use it for university, and apparently I'm still logged in. I am very new. I am a baby dev. I went to boot camp at the end of last year, and I started at Accenture in January. So currently I'm working on some really, really, really old legacy code, and this is the perfect reading material. And I was pleasantly surprised that it is at my level and I can understand it, at least in chapter 1. So that is good news. Daniel?
Yeah, hi. I'm Dan. I work with Oliver at Vika. I'm a PHP developer for quite some years. I've just joined to see what goes on. I read this book, I think maybe 3 years ago, or at least I read over half of it, but judging by my notes. So looking forward to sort of seeing what people get out of it, and maybe get some new ideas. And passing to M5Z S7K.
They've been connecting to audio for about 15 minutes. I'm not sure.
Okay, let me look at the gallery and see if I can see anyone else. No, that's it. Yeah, that's everybody.
That's it.
Right?
Okay, we'll leave M5Z there for now. If you do want to contribute later on, feel free to do so. But until there's a problem, we'll just leave it there. Yeah, I think we've had a bit of a focus down for me on sort of architecture. We've been running some sessions and things on this recently internally from Vika. So this fits in quite nicely with what we've been doing there, I think, as well.
Yeah.
These subjects always come up in the PHP South Wales discussions as well. We have a Slack channel. We're always talking about all this type of stuff. And yeah, for me, like I've read a couple of, like I've read the Symfony Fast Track book and a couple of the Drupal user guide ones, but I don't think I've read any of these. I've probably skimmed over some of the PDFs before, but the first time I really tried to sit down and sort of read some of these books, sort of, yeah, in this sort of way. So I thought this would be fun. Awesome. So yeah, there are a few of us to say working on the first edition and the second edition. So interesting to see as well, I think, some of the differences that do come up if there are any. I seem to think, yeah, I know in the second edition, the code examples are done in JavaScript. So I think the first edition ones are all done in Java. So yeah, I'm assuming there's going to be a couple of new refactors or refactoring of refactors as we go along, but we'll deal with those as we get there. So let's see. Yeah, I had some notes that I was sort of making as I went through that I can sort of refer back to. I'm going to turn into a bit of a blog post afterwards, I think, on a weekly basis. So we'll go from there. But yeah, did anyone have any particular sort of big takeaways or anything come out from the first chapter?
Should we go around? So we all, like, I really want to hear just everyone's kind of just.
Yeah, how should we do this? Because everybody's
it's
going to
not
be
necessarily
a different order, aren't they? Depending on which screen you're on. So
yeah. So I think if someone starts and then passes the baton to someone else until we all do. And I don't think it's like, it doesn't matter whether we remember anything, right? It's more almost sort of how it made us feel.
Okay, go on there. Maybe you start then, Ismail. What was your big takeaway from
that's unfair. That's unfair. I don't know. There were a number of things. I don't know if the second edition has it, but the first edition, one thing that struck me is how new everything was. So he's talking about unit tests as though they were like really, let me introduce this notion of unit testing, and they have to be kind of self-verifying. It's like, this might be a bit radical, but just give it a try. And so that was one, and there were quite a few bits like that. And how sort of small talk was just the most incredible piece of genius. It invented the word OP, it invented refactoring, it invented IDEs, it invented like everything that we're doing now. So I kind of did history in uni, so it was a bit like sort of going back into the past and seeing it from that perspective, which is in a sense quite powerful, isn't it? Because actually these ideas have proven themselves, like, especially in the JavaScript world, that you just have to sneeze for a new framework to appear. But somehow we're still operating within this framework that these people sort of conceived. That was one thing that struck me. The other thing that struck me was that I think he covered it in future chapters, but I got the impression that he basically goes through a checklist whenever he refactors. It's like a drill. It's like he developed this as a drill, all these refactoring things, and you can do them through common sense, but it's like a drill. I'm going to do this, and that's something that I don't see in regular practice. I don't see it very often, this approach to refactoring. It's much more what he was saying in the chapter along the lines of sort of, you're kind of improvising and navigating and saying, no, go through little bits on both. Mm. And the last bit that struck me was that that it wasn't clear cut, that when he begins the story with everything works, I want to change it, there is no need to change it. I wasn't sure I agreed with him by the end of it, kind of thing. It felt like two extremes, and the notion that kind of they had to rebuild the entire application because they hadn't made the changes that he recommended. It's like, maybe, but it raised a good dilemma for me in terms of, when is refactoring really important? And when is the business case for refactoring? Which technical debt will cost you to fix and which technical debt will cost you not to fix in that sense. So I don't know, the fact that that even a book like this is not a formula, that it's actually still a kind of a question mark, and it's not, you don't just go and do it, and it's, yeah. So yeah, it made me think. That's me. Daniel.
I didn't actually read the chapter, so that's not what I'm doing now, right? But yeah, I read it. I did read the chapter, but it was about 3 years ago.
So what stayed with you for 3 years?
Sorry?
What stayed with you for 3 years?
What stayed with me in those 3 years? I mean, I think in general from the book, it sort of pointed out lots of things that I knew anyway. Like as you're going through your years and years of being a developer, you learn things. You learn about refactoring, but you don't know what these things are. You don't know, the terminology, or you don't know that there should be a name for this thing that you're doing, like pulling up a method or extracting a method or extracting an interface, things like that. So for me, the thing that I think generally I took away was just having this sort of vocabulary to talk about refactoring.
It seems to be something a word that we throw around often without really getting everything that sort of implies, we could sort of just changing certain things, refactoring little pieces. But yeah, there's this whole sort of process behind it, I think, and that's what has been quite interesting for me. Is sort of learning a bit more about what it sort of means to do like a large scale refactoring, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, it's just being able to like identify, the things that will make your life easier. So if it's I don't know, what's an example there? Like extracting a method and just breaking down the code and sort of breaking it down into these logical steps, so it's it's readable. And it's just being able to identify the ways that you can do that is really beneficial.
Yeah, I think that was one of my sort of things, one of the sort of notes I made at least in the second edition. It's like, here's the example app that we're going to look at refactoring. And in this one, it's about, I get the words right, a company of theatre players or actors or something. I think in the first one is through the video store, and then has changed it. So because people won't know what a video store is anymore, which I found quite funny as well. Actually, that's one thing I sort of picked up on. I was expecting it to be, as a subject matter, to be sort of quite dry in a sense. It's like, okay, it's about coding. It's going to be really sort of, dry. There were a couple of things I sort of chuckled at as I was reading it. I don't know what that says about my sense of humor, but I think that was one of them. It's like, the situations like that with my kids were like, what's a video store? What do you mean? That's a thing. But there we are. But that was like one thing I'd sort of made a note on. It's just the size of that function. It was one of the first things we probably want to look into splitting it up and taking steps. So for me, just on my sort of initial thoughts, like what could we do about refactoring this, and it sort of went through them, at least some of them, sort of step by step, which was quite nice. There were a couple there I sort of thought afterwards we probably could do, but that was quite interesting. So it was a nice little checklist for me to sort of see some of the things we could do with it. Susanna, what did you think?
There were quite a few things that I read in that chapter that surprised me in a good way. So, for example, I've got this quote that he said that brevity is the soul of wit, but clarity is the soul of evolvable software. And until now, I think I always thought that refactoring something means making it shorter and more like elegant, whatever that means. But in here, I think he started with sorry, there's a train passing by, you can probably hear it. That he started with, function that he started with was actually shorter than what we ended up with. So it's not always about making stuff shorter and more concise and elegant, sometimes you make stuff, longer, but it's more clear to the developers. So this is definitely something I'm going to apply. It's not always having one-liners everywhere, something that's just to the point. Because I think I even mentioned it on Twitter the other day that those elegant solutions, those that fit on one line, and that when like, if you work with a framework or the language, to understand the solution, really need to understand either the framework or the language in more depth. And that's not really very good for beginners or people who are just switching languages, because yeah, it looks nice, but would you understand it? So I believe sometimes it's better to have the code longer, but make sure it's clear enough. There's the clarity. So I like that he mentioned it. And as soon as I read it, I was like, yeah, okay, we're gonna get on. But I don't know, I have to say, this first chapter, at first I read the code, but then I jumped over the code because he kept mentioning the names of the techniques that he's using to refactor the code. And I kept flipping through the book back to the function and then go back. And I was like, I think I'm going to go back to this chapter 1 once I read through the techniques, and then I'm going to go back to see how I applied it. It's going to make more sense to me rather than reading the example now and then read about techniques later. You know what I mean? So like, I've read the text, but I have to admit that I only read the beginning of the actual refactoring because it just took too much understanding. So I thought I'm just gonna, it's chapter 1 at the end anyway. I'm not supposed to understand what he's doing there. I hope I'm not. But yeah. But all in all, yeah, quite a few things. And also, like he says, the naming is hard, which is so nice to be acknowledged by somebody who's so respected. That it's not just me, or that everyone struggles with naming, and a few things that he said I quite like. So yeah.
It's also interesting from what you said, how the way he described the book, he didn't suggest you read it from cover to cover. He said, if you want to learn this, look at this one. If you want this, look at that one. And the first chapter is just because I get bored unless I have something concrete first. So I'm going to start with something concrete and then go, it's like, that's your learning style, but somebody else's learning style is actually, get me through first principles. So it's nice that you've been able to kind of do that, switching back and forth. That's great.
Yeah, it definitely mentions as well, like he's didn't want to write something too simple. In fact, like he's saying that the example was almost too simple. Like you probably wouldn't want to refactor this. I think we sort of touched on this a minute ago. Like you might actually not want to refactor this in the real world, but for the sake of an example in a book, I didn't want to start with anything too crazy. So I think that was, that was quite right.
But then he spent like 20 pages refactoring the simple example. Like, what would the difficult example look like? I don't even want to know.
It said at some point it was running to 100 pages, wasn't it? His first draft. Well, that's what he said in edition 1. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by how easy it was to read, how pleasant it was to read, the tone that he took. It wasn't at all kind of preachy and theoretical, which is such a relief, because as I say, I did a boot camp for 4 months last year, and now I'm doing a part-time master's degree in software engineering. And a lot of the stuff they have us reading is very dry, very boring. They're really limited on actual freaking code, which is hard work because that's what I want to do. But they're teaching us in Java, so this is perfect. Edition 1, 1999, this is about where we are. And I love that they had the sequence. I don't know if they do the sequence diagrams in the second one, but these are something that I need to understand. And once he'd laid them out in here, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. This is literally, he's comparing them to the classes. I can see where everything's going. I get it. And that was pleasing. And there were a couple of things that I highlighted because I feel like I must have been taught to do it, but it comes kind of naturally, like getting rid of temporary variables. He was saying to do that as much as possible because they don't have to be there. And I was like, okay, often we're told from an educational standpoint, oh, make it nice and clear, make a temporary variable, call it this, pass it in there. And it's like, but I don't need to. And it's not that hard to understand because everything else is named well. So it was nice to see him kind of lay out why you don't always need to do that. So there were certain things like that I was pleased to read. Yeah,
it's often a balancing act, isn't it? Because you can get rid of all the temporary variables and just have a one-liner with a bunch of closures and function calls chaining up to each other, and it's great and it's really impressive, and there's no temporary variables, but it's completely unintelligible, or you can sort of have a class with, 15 private methods. And I think, I'm not sure if it was Uncle Bob Martin, or Martin Fowler, who said that, you should aim to have every method should just be online, just everything should be broken down as much as possible. But I think this can also lead to just pointless interaction. You have to follow all these links, all these method calls to see what's actually going on. So I think often it's a balancing act. It's sort of making sure you've got just the right amount of refactoring done, so that I think what Susanna was saying earlier, just so you can understand it, clarity is more important than anything else, I think.
It also seems to be like there's so many of these dilemmas and trade-offs, aren't there? That this thing that is not a formula, because I was thinking how, it's a thing that you get, drilled into. Do not do premature optimization, right? You optimize afterwards. But refactoring is all about prevention, right? Here's everything is saying this could go wrong if we change it this way, if we change it that way. So it's everything about anticipation. And it did strike me two things. One is the relevance of experience. If you don't have experience, it's harder to make those judgment calls. So this might go wrong or this might not go wrong. And then the counterpoint to that, the value of the drilling approach, the fact that if instead of relying purely on intuition and experience, you go through this drill of this step that he gives us, and this vocabulary, and you go through, okay, every time I look at code, I go through this ta 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 ta. But at the same time, it's sort of that judgment. It's also a bit like agile versus waterfall. It's like, are you going to sort of foresee the future of the entire application in all the possible ways it could change, and therefore prevent them all? Or, how far do you refactor for? How much do you want? How much do you prevent, and how much you don't? And all of those things, like when you just read them in the book, it feels like really clear cut. But I think when it really comes to applying it in real life, there are so many judgment calls, aren't there? And that's where I think it helps to have more than one person working on it sometimes, to be able to kind of reality check each other and code review and all that kind of thing, where actually it's like, that's too much, fine. Okay, well, or that's too little. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in maybe even in the preface of this one, is like there was talk about the developers, the engineers were really happy because they managed to refactor a lot of stuff and it was cleaner and it was better. But on the flip side, the sort of PMs and the project management and the product owners, like, we want to ship new stuff. Why aren't we shipping new stuff? So yeah, I think it is that balancing act, isn't it? Like, we could refactor stuff forever, probably, or probably going to be. It is just knowing when is good enough, I think. And yeah, I remember thinking, actually, we talked about the temporary variable thing. Like, I remember when I was a junior dev a while ago, like, I remember, I'd see maybe a for each loop in PHP, and it's like X and I and Y. I'm like, why is it called that? And I just couldn't wrap my head around why. Like, is eyes a magic thing or something? Like, it's sort of implied that it does. Yeah, really. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That still annoys me. I am still annoyed by I++. Every time I see it, I am still annoyed.
Does it have to be
it.
called I? Yeah. I still remember questioning, does it have to be called I? Does it have a meaning, this I? Does
exactly,
it have to be why is it called I? Why not A? Or I think what does I stand for? It's like item? I don't know.
Index.
Index.
That's how I expanded it anyway, eventually. It was
in my mind, it's
index, we can't use short variable names, so I'm going to expand it to index, and then I use index everywhere, and it's just as bad. It's maybe it is an index. It's and you're going to use that index, but often you could be doing for each, or doing a different type of iteration to avoid having that index. There's usually a way. I don't think I use those. For I equals 0, I is less than X, I++. I can't remember the last time I used one of those.
Google it every time.
Yeah.
This is completely other subject. This is why coding interviews, I think, are really difficult. If you've got to do like coding tests on an interview, but you can't Google anything. It's like, I've never written a for loop in that way since, 10 years ago, like without Googling it, the syntax. So yeah, don't maybe do it in a notepad, please. That's a bit silly.
One
Yeah.
thing that struck me, was that I think when I first started programming and getting into unit testing, I've always approached, or I always felt that unit tests were about validating the work that I had just done. Whereas it was very beautifully kind of emphasized for me in the book that actually the main reason for your tests is for the changes you will do in future. So it's not so much to show that the code you did works, that too, but it's really primarily to know that if you change anything else, you're not going to have to guess. It's going to make your life easier. And that notion that you're testing for the future, not for the present, I quite liked.
So
Yeah, I
think
like-
that.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, go on.
He says in the book, like the way, because he does the test, he writes, this is in the second version or the second edition, he says that he writes the test and then the code. And because we write it twice, it's less likely you'll make a mistake. And if you do, you are, more likely to notice it. So tests are not just for, like you said, for the future, but also as you are writing the code, if you have to repeat yourself twice, hopefully you won't make the mistake, but yeah.
Exactly, it's like double bookkeeping, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I sort of resent sometimes the thing with some of the types of unit tests we write, with mocks and sort of mocking frameworks and things like that, they're actually quite fragile. So if you change something, then all of your unit tests break, and you have to adapt the values of the mocks to get them working again. But then you've just you've adapted the expectations of the mocks. You haven't really, what you say the mock should do is what they will do. It's not really testing the system as a whole. I've forgotten what I was going to say now.
Yeah, it's interesting with me. Like, there's obviously it's not really a book on testing primarily, but there is this sort of overlap between sort of testing and refactoring. And then there's, at least when I'm reading it, I know I've been doing a lot of looking at sort of certain design patterns and things, but I'm looking at some of the code and go, okay, this sort of needs to follow, single responsibility and sort of open close, those sort of solid principles. So yeah, I don't know, it's just the way I'm sort of looking at it because of what I've been doing recently, but there does seem to be an overlap between these sort of things. And like to Ismail's point, like they're all books from that sort of era on like clean code and testing and refactoring. So, and yeah, none of these are new things. I think in one of Larry Garfield's talks, he talks about this like project management from the 60s or something, and he's even mentioned unit testing there as like not being a new thing then. So I don't know why this perception is it's a new thing that's coming around now. So
well, it was the case. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, it was the case when I started programming, like sort of 10, 13 years ago. Every GitHub repository went on when GitHub just started, and it says, "Look, we've got unit tests." Every repository said, "Look, it has unit tests," and that was the stamp, the quality stamp, because it just wasn't typical at all, at least in PHP. So now you just take it for granted. There's a library that you use, you expect it to have tests. So in PHP at least, it's sort of, it wasn't there at all in the beginning.
One thing that I did find interesting about this was that I don't feel I've come across it with this kind of perspective, sort of this TDD, the test-driven development. Like the way I've seen it approached, it's more around feature development kind of thing. I'm going to develop something new, so I'm going to write a test in order to develop something new. And I hadn't really seen it presented the way that he was presenting it here, which is test-driven refactoring. that's not a term I've come across. Like, I'm sure it's a practice of many people intuitively, but there was a very clear logic to his method, wasn't it? Which was that you refactor as small chunks as possible, so that you are able, and as you refactor, you create tests, so you're able to actually be confident in your next refactoring. You know, the reason you're testing is so you can then refactor the next thing and not have to worry about how it will affect the system, because you've got this covered. But I don't think I've come across it that clearly elsewhere. I haven't really heard it presented in those terms, that when you're going to refactor something, begin by creating unit tests, not for the feature or for, for the general endpoint, as it were, but just to get you to refactor at the right scale, kind of thing. I'm refactoring. What am I refactoring? I'm refactoring what fits into a test assertion, right? I'm going to assert that this is going to be like this. Right, let me refactor this. Once that's there, I can move on to the next one. And at least for me, that approach to refactoring was new in its kind of emphasis and clarity.
Yeah, that I really enjoyed reading that laid out. Like, build yourself a safety net, do the things you've got to do, use your safety net, check that everything's all right, and then move on to the next bit. And it was very much, you do this and then you do this, which made perfect sense. I was like, oh, I'm kind of glad. I feel inspired to write more unit tests, because actually this is exactly how they should be used. They're not something that should just be tacked onto the end to prove a point. They should be used as you're going, just to keep yourself safe. And that gave me a different emotional response to unit tests. I didn't feel as annoyed by them, more help. But there's one thing I've just spotted that I highlighted that I found interesting, when he, almost in passing, talks about a method being on the wrong object, which is not really something that I've ever thought about. But he moves a method from one class to another because it refers more to that class than it does to the first class. And it's never occurred to me that it might be a good thing to actually assess my methods and think that some of them should be in different places. So I appreciated that. And that's a move method, page 142. So it'll be fun when we get there. You can learn all about it.
Yeah, I've seen a talk. I think it was Mark Bradley gave it at maybe it's PHP London. It's on YouTube. But yeah, he's talking about, did this talk on test-driven development. And I'm fairly sure it was that talk, but he says, like, again, like testing, a lot of people write tests sort of at the end because they sort of feel like they have to. And that's boring because you've written the code already, and all you're doing is writing the tests that make it pass. You just whereas if you're writing the test first, then you've got to go through this loop of actually making things work properly, which I thought was quite interesting. And yeah, that's where typically where I've seen that is that sort of red, green, or typically I've seen it called red, green, blue, or just red, green refactor. So failing test, then you write enough code to make the test pass, and then you've got that chance then to refactor. So maybe in the first instance, you just return like an empty string or a hard-coded number or something. And then as you write more tests, then you're like, okay, my hard-coded number doesn't work anymore. I need to then start writing some actual code. And I don't know how many of us have watched, I know watching some of the Laracast videos, like Jeffrey Way explains this concept really, really well when he's done any sort of testing videos. Like, what's the simplest thing that we can do now to make it pass? And it's just that constant, what's the simplest thing? And then something else I picked up in the book is it's like, as well as making very small refactors, like commit them very often as well. So that worst case, you just revert your commit back and you're back to where you were and everything passes. And then yes, you don't need to push 100 commits up to GitHub or whatever. You can rebase and squash them. So you just get one big or a more logical grouping of commits. But then for you locally, have 10 or 100, however many you need to feel comfortable.
I confess I have been failing to do atomic commits for quite a long time since I started using JetBrains, because it remembers everything. So I can always, it has its own internal versioning. So now, it's like I feel guilty every time I commit, because I'm committing like my final bit but the only reason I'm doing it is because I actually have this kind of internal versioning in the IDE that I've been kind of relying on, and I still, as I say, it's kind of this sort of guilty little pleasures.
Yeah, that's quite. It's almost similar. I think I've seen Mark Bry talk about it, but there's a thing about test. Get this right: test and commit or revert. I think that's what it is. So like you make like a really small change, and then if your test fails, it gets reverted back automatically, and you try again, and it's that constant sort of cycle. So yeah, when I was reading this and make these very small refactors, I instinctively thought of atomic commits and then this test commit revert thing, which was quite interesting.
One thing that I heard in a lightning talk, I think maybe in PHP Southwest or Luxembourg, I don't know, but it was a really nice concept, was that helped me psychologically relate to tests in a different way, stayed with me, was that when you set out to code anything, you have an intention, right? I want this code to do something. That's what you set out. That's the thing that gets you going into a code. And that actually, that's the beginning of testing, right? I wanted to do this. That's what I'm going to do. And actually, that's a really nice way to approach testing and TDD, because you begin. It's no longer something you kind of have to connect. It's been easy for me to go like, okay, what do I want this to do? Right, let me write it down. Assert, I wanted to do this. Assert, I wanted to do that. And then it helps me kind of plan my code as well, kind of thing. But sort of, it was an interesting thing to realize that it wasn't just something you test, it's actually your intention. A test is your reason for coding.
That's a good way to look at it, because for me, every time I know this is the way to do it, like that you first write the test and then you do the code, but it's just so negative. Like, it's going to fail, and like you start coding and already feeling down because it's gonna fail. So I'm just, I can't get over that. I mean, you do it because that's the way it's done, but and although I know it's gonna fail, and every time I see that red in the test, I'm like, So it's just, I need to change my mindset about it because it's so negative.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that way before.
Have you not? Sorry, did I spoil it for you now? You're gonna say
no, I mean,
would be like...
there's definitely been a shift, I think. Like, and I've done this when I've taught TDD at workshops and given talks on it. Like, I remember being like seeing an error and then get really frustrated by it. It'd be like, oh, there's another error or something, thinking it was something that was bad. But then when you're doing like a TDD cycle, it's telling you what to do next. So I'm sort of approaching it from a completely different mindset. So yeah,
maybe they need to change the color. I think maybe not red.
You can do it in Git.
Like
you can
danger.
Yeah, if you do you can do a Git status and change the colors. Maybe you could do it in the PHP unit or something. Get it to change the colors as well.
But I think in a sense that's the difference, as you said, about doing the test first. Because I think when you're doing the test last, then that psychological thing that you mentioned, Susanna, makes sense because you've actually invested, you've worked the whole thing. And then if it fails, it is actually a judgment on your work. Right? You've worked really hard. You are actually hoping it works. Whereas if you're using the test as a statement of intention, right? There is no code. You go, this is what I wanted to do. Then there is no sense of failure because there's nothing to fail, right? It only gets better from that.
Yeah.
So it's I think because we've had bad experiences at school with tests, with exams, with all of these things, then when you do it at the end, I feel the same as you. But I think learning to think about it as actually how I'm already thinking about it. When I say assert this is what I've already thought, right? That's how my brain has already begun to code. I wanted to do this, this, and this. So I'm just going to write it down. And until it does it, I can relate to that sort of shift of psychology.
When I'm coding, I rarely write the test as the first thing. So I normally sort of dive in and because I don't have an idea what I'm going to do really. I want to achieve an aim, but it's more than one class, it's more than one unit. So I normally start prototyping, and maybe I have to create several classes with different roles, and maybe those are completely wrong. But this is kind of part of the process. And then when I've locked the things down, then I'll start introducing the tests. and then I'll start adding the test cases, and that I'd sort of do ahead of time. So I could say, yes, it has to do this, and this. But yeah, the intention for me, it's never necessarily there the first time. And I think sometimes you can sort of maybe even waste a lot of time if you dive in and start writing tests, methodically for every little experiment you do. And then it's also, you have this, I think, investment, what do they call it? Like an investment fallacy. Because you spent so long writing this test.
Yeah.
You don't want to delete it. People are, no, I can't delete my code. It's taken me 15 minutes, half an hour to write all this stuff. I'm going to keep it.
That's a good point. I think maybe I should have said more that what I like to begin with is writing the assertions. So they're not linked to any class. They're not linked to any functionality. They are my intention broken down. My code should do this, should do that. And when I'm beginning, it's quite vague, right? The assertions might begin quite general. And then I start coding, but I'm coding to those assertions. And as I start coding, I can assert more because it's like, now I want this to do this. And eventually, I'm able to link those assertions to specific code. And then I can begin to, it's gotten close enough that I can go, okay, now I'm going to make this work. At the start, I don't really know whether it works, but thinking in
You're
terms
sort of specifying
of
the feature. You're saying this is the feature, this is the thing, and then sort of specifying it as a whole, but not necessarily the unit.
Exactly. The code doesn't exist, but the assertion exists. So that's actually how I'm going to know whether I'm doing well or not. And in that sense, it has helped me a lot reduce the iterations in some ways, because when I'm working more organically, it can sometimes take me a while. Like I can get excited by what I'm doing. Like this is really cool, and it's actually not delivering any of the assertions that I really want. Right? It's not the functionality. No. It's logic. It's cool logic. Whereas if I'm going, okay, this is the things that I want in my code. At the end, this has to happen. It has been helpful, but it's different. I think you're right. If I were to actually write the whole test suite before I don't even know how I would do that, to be honest. my brain would dry. Good point.
Yeah, I found that the first test I usually write is something super vague, like it does something, and that like is just my sort of setup test usually, and then the next one becomes more specific, and it's like for a certain use case, and I usually then go back and I sort of, okay, what was that first test meant to be doing again? And I sort of then usually go back and name it properly, because by then I've got a better idea of what it is.
It runs.
Exactly. It does a thing. So that's quite interesting.
Like the blank page syndrome, it's so much harder to start writing on a blank page. So it just pastes any text there, anything there, and then you kind of take it on. And then you go back to the original text, you delete it or so
There were two more big picture architectural things that he raised there that really spoke to me. One was the notion that refactoring, like I think we think of refactoring as sort of putting out fires in a sense, right? There's a problem with the code, we fix it by refactoring, and you refactor when there's a problem with the code. But the way he presented it was that actually refactoring is a way of approaching architecture as an organic process. This notion that you do not design a system at the beginning, and that's it, that's your architecture, but that actually you consciously embark on sort of your initial architecture is just your starting point. And refactoring is the way you carry on refining and building that architecture. And the architecture never stops. So refactoring is sort of not just something you do to fix the problem, but also something you do to build, to evolve your app, I suppose. So that it's a kind of living organism. That was one point. And the other one was a more practical one, which was that if you're finding that something you're trying to do doesn't fit easily into your program, instead of spending a lot of time trying to make it fit with the program, first refactor the program and then fit your feature. And that was, again, a useful a useful tip, I thought, a useful insight, a useful sort of a nice like reaction. No, I'm finding this painful. That's a sign that maybe I should refactor the app, not build my feature yet.
Yeah, isn't it? It's something like, yeah, to make the change, do the thing to make the change easy, then make the easy change or something
Right.
like that.
Nice.
Yeah. So I've done that. I want to do a thing, and it should just be maybe a couple of lines in a PR. But to get to that point, there needs to be another PR that comes before it that refactors a load of stuff. So, and that needs to be its own sort of commit that's refactor the thing, and then or maybe its own separate sort of pull request or merge request or something. So yeah, that's just easier from a code review perspective. Then, like in this PR, this is just the refactoring. So if I'm reviewing that, I'm in one mindset because it's like a refactoring, and then the other one, I'm in a different mindset again because I'm fixing a bug or I'm adding that feature now. So from a reviewer's perspective, I can see some benefit to splitting those out as well.
Can you repeat that phrase? It was very nicely put.
I'm probably misquoting it, but it's something like do the hard thing to make the change easy and then make the easy change or something like that. I'll look it up and I'll find the actual quote. I'm probably butchering it. It's probably nothing like that at all. That's how I've remembered it. But
nice.
Yeah,
it sounds easy, doesn't it?
It's most things, I guess. Yeah,
I think a lot of the time, when especially when you're in sort of nasty, big, scary legacy systems,
I found it. Sorry, I was just saying, I found it's by Kent Beck, which is, I think, contributed to the book Refactoring as well. So Kent Beck said, for each desired change, make the change easy and then make the easy change.
Nice.
It was very
I was pretty close.
very
I'll
close.
Take that.
Yeah, well done.
I actually preferred your version, Oliver. I preferred your version. You said something like, do the hard work to make the change easy and then make the easy change. I actually prefer the Oliver remake.
Okay, I'll take that.
I'm gonna quote yours in future.
Yeah, put that on Twitter so we can,
Okay, fine. Do that afterwards. Yeah, I'll add it to my Obsidian notes afterwards. There we go.
Daniel, you were halfway through saying something.
I'll just say it sounds easy when you saying like just make it easy to make the easy change, but sometimes that's not easy at all.
Yeah.
It could be one PR which affects all of the system. And this is a really fine art of like how to go about refactoring like these big systems. You can't just fix it. I mean, and if you do, it could be like a month, 2 months, 1 year sort of strategy, like a war plan or something, to fix the system somehow. And if you fail, you end up with this kind of, this code that doesn't really fit in anywhere, which was going to be part of a bigger thing, but never quite made it. And then somebody else would come along 2 years later and try something else.
And then you have
that's why it's important to always reduce the disorder in software, right? This is why we should always continue to refactor, because if people are contributing to code and just making it more disorderly all the time, then it just you're making it impossible to change later on, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's also being able to judge what are functional imperfections and what are kind of system-wide imperfections. Because I think as devs, we really don't like the functional imperfections. They really irk us. They're the ones that we get really annoyed by because we bump into them all the time. And it goes like, why is this here? This is ugly, or this is painful, or, but actually as a business, it's actually, a net loss to fix that one compared to building a new feature. But vice versa, if an imperfection is systemic, it might be quite small, but actually this is the kind of thing that is going to make you have to rebuild the entire app, or it's going to have to, this works as long as the company doesn't succeed, the moment it grows, it breaks. So, being able to identify the difference between the technical bets that will cost you the business and the system something, and the ones that will cause just the developer's irritation, is is really important, because
Mm.
I think sort of that trade-off at the beginning, sort of the, if you are in a situation where all of your business people are all saying that all you did was, not helpful, it takes a bit of humility to go, maybe, I'm going too far with this, and maybe there's somewhere halfway. So I think, yeah, understanding which bits of refactoring are important and which bits are just desirable is hard, but really important.
Yeah, I wonder if that's any easier. So I think like if in like an agency freelancer setting compared to if you're working on like a product like over a sustained period of time, whether it's easier to sort of get those refactoring tickets done. Because like from an agency side, and the majority of my career so far has been an agency, it's you've got clients and they want the new features shipped, or they want the colors on the banner changed, or something they can physically see. But then like we've got like I build up like there's a client backlog of new things they want done, and then there's almost like the developer backlog of the things that we want to go in and refactor. And it seems to be this like, okay, we've got X number of days this month to spend or whatever on this client, and it's this sort of juggling act then of the client wants this feature, then we want to refactor that thing from before. And like there's one that springs to mind, but I won't mention it. But like every sort of thing that we do, like there's a massive patch we're adding to one of it's a Drupal project. And there's like a 3,000 line patch that we're adding to add this extra functionality. And it doesn't apply to the latest version anymore. So every time we update the module, I need to go in and re-roll this patch every time, which adds hours, or like every time I want to do it, then I've got to get through all the BHAT testing and everything. Like the amount of time that adds, just to think of one example, compared to just having the time put aside to refactor it initially,
But I suppose that's a really
pay for
good
itself by now.
But in a sense, that's a really good discipline, right? I think that's the bit that allows us to make that case, because ultimately it's their decision. But I think in that sense, sort of like that's two examples. That's one example from what you've described, that it's not something that necessarily will break the system in future, but it's costing them a lot, because they're having to pay for your time. So you're able to make a case quite clearly. You can say, not refactoring this will accumulate into this much extra. If you're happy to pay for it, that's fine, because we'll carry on with other things. And then there's the other ones, right? Which is not doing this will not cost you anything now, but it might cost you once, you paid me, you've gone away in 3 years' time. This might cost you a lot. It's your decision, kind of thing. And then there's the ones that are just a pain, but in a sense, maybe having those kinds of pressures for the client are a pretty good way to articulate what it is that's costing. What are the changes that matter and which ones don't, in a sense.
Yeah, that's something we'll probably go in that does matter. Parks is having an effect, I guess, on the end sort of application. Like if it's a to-do in the code that just says rename this variable to be something better, or rename this function or something, or split this functionality, like that would be in the nice to have sort of pile. Right. So yeah, you're right. There's a definite prioritizing that needs to happen. So yeah, but yeah, that's mentioned, I think, in the prefix. So this thing between clients and PMs, and it's quite interesting.
I've got to run, guys, but I will be back because this was fun.
Okay.
Lovely to see you, Jenny.
Good to meet you, Jenny.
Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you, Jenny.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
Okay, let's see. I've been on for about an hour. So anything else in particular? Any we sort of took away from this, or feel that we want to mention?
I think the last thing, I think you mentioned at the last page of the chapter 1, you said it, you go faster when you take tiny steps. And that's also something that I relate to, that like when it comes to refactoring, you don't have to refactor huge things. Like it's not about making like a big change. Refactoring is anything as like removing the inline, local variable. This is refactoring. It doesn't have to be anything huge or extreme. Like, so because I always thought like who does refactoring? Only people who knows the code really well or knows the language or the framework, and it's kind of gatekeeping, keeping other people saying, "Oh, I'm not senior enough to do any refactoring." When in fact, you do refactoring every day, all day, pretty much. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's the small steps, and yeah, when you do it in small steps, and as he shown in the chapter 1, and you do a little change, test it, commit, do the change, test, commit, like really often, small changes. Yeah.
Yeah. In a way, if you're the new person coming to the code base, or you're the person doing the PR, you're more likely to see the good refactoring. Because if I've been writing this function and like I'm writing it and I might, I've got blinkers on and I'm writing because I know what I'm doing, I'll probably write it in a certain way. But yeah, this is the benefit of having peer review or peer programming or something. It's just having that other pair of eyes. Or if you're new to that project, you're just trying to read it, figure out what it does. You can go, oh yeah, this thing would be better named, whatever, or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, just So I'm sure there's a thing about being senior for, do I know this project enough to do anything? But say just like that must be would be a good way to get someone on board onto a project, is go in and make a little sort of change to something sort of small and just make something a bit better. Rather than here's a massive change, add a new payment gateway or something as your first commit. That would be a bit much.
Which I imagine is what you deal with in an agency life. It's like, welcome board, that's great, we'd like you to this big project that has been here for 5 years and add us a payment gateway in 3 weeks. I have a lot of respect for you guys, really.
Yeah, quite possibly. But yeah, it's been quite interesting seeing. So obviously you have like client code that needs refactoring, but a lot has changed. So I work primarily with the Drupal CMS, and that's been quite interesting because the way that has changed throughout the last couple of major versions is that parts of core are being deprecated now all the time. And then when Drupal 9 was released, all the deprecated code went away. So it's a lot more similar to how Symfony and others do it. So I'm also having to constantly refactor my code to keep in line with what core is doing.
Right.
So that's been quite interesting because that was never a thing we've really had to do before. I sort of say that from someone who builds client projects for HTTP, also maintains modules. I need to make sure my modules are all up to date. And one version of a module works for multiple versions of core now, which never used to be a thing. So I'm always having to go in and refactor stuff.
Well, it's been fantastic. I also have to go, but thank you so much for coming, making it happen together, kind of thing. It's I look forward to carrying on with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I think we're going to do one like next Monday, it's the 19th, and we could start looking at principles and refactoring. So chapter 2.
Yeah.
So that'd be quite. And I think some of us are a little bit ahead, or someone's posting in the Slack channel a little bit ahead. So we shall see. But likewise, I think this has been really fun. It's been good to get away from the screen for a little bit, sit and read a book for a difference, and not just be make a change to reading PDFs or watching videos or something. It's been quite a nice sort of change. Yeah, this has been good.
Cool. Well, see you next week.
See you next week.
Good week, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.